Princess Leora of Safarion sat at the grand window, her eyes scanning the endless stars that stretched across the galaxy. Her mind wasn't on the beauty of the universe outside. Instead, she was lost in thought, feeling the weight of the royal duties she had always been taught to uphold. She was the youngest daughter of King Kalen, a ruler whose wisdom was praised throughout the galaxy. The people of Safarian were proud of their kingdom's history, rich in technology and culture. But Leora had always felt out of place. The pressures of being a princess, the expectations that came with her name, were suffocating. Despite the luxuries she lived with, Leora longed for something more. She wanted to explore beyond the palace walls, to experience the world for herself. But those desires were often brushed aside, lost in the shadows of her royal obligations. Her father, King Kalen, had arranged this diplomatic mission, and it was her duty to accompany him. She would be meeting with other leaders to discuss alliances and trade, but all she could think about was the dullness of it all. "Your Highness, the ship is ready for departure." The captain's voice echoed through the room, interrupting her thoughts. Leora turned to face him. His presence was a reminder of the strict order that governed her life, and for a moment, she hesitated. "Thank you, Captain," she said softly, nodding toward the door. The captain left, leaving her alone in the room. She took one last glance at the stars before making her way to the ship. The journey to the distant planet was long, and as expected, the diplomatic meetings were anything but exciting. The leaders she met with were all polite, exchanging pleasantries, but there was no real spark, no deep connection. Leora's mind wandered during the talks, and soon she found herself on the outskirts of the meeting hall, looking for something to catch her attention. That's when she heard it. The sound of something different. The guards, stationed at every corner of the palace, were tense. Something was happening outside. Curiosity tugged at Leora, and without thinking, she slipped out of the palace through a narrow corridor. The cool night air greeted her as she stepped into the open, where she saw a group of captured prisoners, alien soldiers from a nearby galaxy. They were being escorted to the holding cells, but one of them stood out from the rest. A human warrior. Leora's heart skipped a beat. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and the sight of one in chains was both startling and intriguing. He had the look of a fighter, strong and determined, his expression one of quiet defiance despite the restraints on his hands. His posture was straight, not a trace of fear in his eyes. There was something in the way he carried himself that struck her. He was unlike anyone she had ever encountered. She couldn't take her eyes off him. He wasn't like the others, afraid, broken, or submissive. Instead, his gaze locked with hers, and for a moment, she could sense the fire within him. The guards didn't notice the princess's presence, and before anyone could stop her, Leora approached the prisoner. "Who is he?" she asked one of the guards, her voice soft but commanding. The guard turned, surprised.
"A human, Your Highness!"
He was captured during the battle on the outskirts of the Terran system. He is being held until the Royal Council decides his fate. "A human?" Leora's curiosity grew. "What do you plan to do with him?" The guard hesitated. "The council will decide whether he will be executed or used as a laborer." Leora's eyes widened. The idea of executing this man, this warrior, seemed wrong to her, though she couldn't explain why. There was something about him that intrigued her, something beyond the fact that he was human. He wasn't like the prisoners she had seen in the past. He wasn't broken. He was different. She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. His face was rough, covered in dirt and sweat, but there was a certain ruggedness to him that made him stand out among the rest. His eyes, dark and intense, held hers without fear, without begging for mercy. It was a gaze that challenged authority, that defied the odds. Leora felt an unexpected pull. Her instinct told her to act, to do something, anything, to prevent him from being cast aside. She couldn't explain why, but she knew in that moment that his fate was tied to hers in some way. Without thinking, she made a decision. "I claim him," she said, her voice firm and clear. The guard stared at her, confused.
"Your Highness?" I claim him as my personal guard, she repeated, her gaze unwavering.
He will be placed under my protection. The guards looked at each other, unsure of how to respond. It was rare for a royal to make such a decision on their own, especially without consulting the council. But Leora was determined. This man, this warrior, was different from the others, and she would not let him be discarded like an object. The prisoner, Kale, as he would later reveal his name to be, didn't show any emotion when Leora made her claim. He simply nodded, as if he had already known that something like this would happen. He said nothing as the guards led him toward her, and his eyes never left hers. For the first time in a long time, Leora felt a sense of purpose. She wasn't just a princess bound by tradition and duty. She was making a choice, and for the first time in her life, it was her choice alone. She had claimed him, and now it was up to her to decide what would happen next. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Kale, despite his imprisonment, showed no fear. He didn't speak much, but he wasn't compliant either. He walked with purpose, his eyes constantly scanning his surroundings. He was a warrior through and through, and Leora could see that he was a man of honor, someone who would fight until the very end. As they spent more time together, Leora learned that Kale had come from Earth, a planet far from Safarian's reach, where humans lived on a world of their own. He had been sent to fight in a war he didn't fully understand, and during one of the battles he had been captured by the Safarian forces. His comrades had fallen, and Kale had been left to fight alone. But he hadn't given up. He refused to be broken, even in the face of capture. Leora admired that about him. She admired his resilience, his strength, and his determination. But she also saw the pain in his eyes, the pain of a man who had lost everything, who had been dragged into a war that wasn't his own. It made her wonder why he was still fighting, why he hadn't given in. Over time, Leora and Kale began to talk more. At first, their conversations were brief, but slowly, they started to understand each other. Leora learned about Earth, about the humans who lived there, and the struggles they faced. Kale spoke of his home, of the wars he had fought, and the people he had lost. He spoke with a quiet sorrow, but there was no bitterness in his voice. He simply accepted the things that had happened to him, even though they were far beyond his control. Leora shared her own story of being a princess, trapped in a world of expectations. She spoke of the pressure to follow in her father's footsteps, to live up to the ideals of the Safarian people. But she also spoke of her dreams, her desire to break free, to experience life on her own terms, and as she spoke, she realized that her encounter with Kale wasn't just by chance. It was fate.
As the days passed, Leora found herself looking forward to their conversations.
She enjoyed the way Kale made her think differently, how he challenged the beliefs she had grown up with, but she also felt something else, a connection that went beyond their differences. She found herself drawn to him, to his strength, and to the way he made her feel alive. But she also knew that their bond was dangerous. Her claim over him was not accepted by everyone in the kingdom. The royal council, the lords, and even her father would see her actions as a challenge to their authority. The decision to claim a human as her personal guard could cause a rift that would shake the very foundations of the Safarian Empire. But Leora didn't care. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. Kyle was hers, and she would protect him, no matter what. The days following Princess Leora's decision to claim Kale as her personal guard were filled with challenges and surprises. She had expected some resistance from the royal court, but she had not anticipated the way the palace would change with Kale's presence. People spoke in hushed tones whenever they passed him, and whispers followed him everywhere he went. The very idea of a human warrior living among the Safarian royals was enough to stir up curiosity and suspicion. Leora knew that she had made a bold choice, one that could not only affect her reputation, but also her position within the royal family. Her father, King Kalen, was a man of tradition and honor, and he valued order above all else. He would never approve of his daughter claiming a human warrior, especially one captured in battle. Yet, Leora could not bring herself to regret her decision.
Every day she spent with Kale only made her more certain that he was not just another prisoner, not just a tool to be used by the Safarian kingdom. He was a man of honor, and he deserved more than what the Empire had planned for him.
At first, Kale had kept his distance. He was grateful for the princess's protection, but he knew better than to get too close. He had fought in countless wars, seen the brutality of the galaxy, and lost far too many comrades to trust anyone easily. But Leora was different. She was kind, though in a way that she didn't fully understand. She had not claimed him for the usual reasons, because of his strength or his skills, but because something in her saw something in him that no one else had noticed. She saw a man who had been lost, and she offered him a chance to find himself again. As the days turned into weeks, their interactions became more frequent. Kale would accompany Leora to her private chambers, where they would speak for hours about their lives, their worlds, and their thoughts. It was during these talks that Kale began to realize how much he had in common with the princess. Though their worlds were so different, they both felt trapped by the expectations placed on them by their families and their societies. Leora spoke of her duty to her kingdom, the pressure of being the daughter of the king, and how she was constantly told what to do. Kale spoke of the wars he had fought, the people he had lost, and how, after all these years of battle, he had come to realize that war was never the answer. At first, Leora had viewed Kale as just a warrior, someone who had been claimed for his strength and resilience, but over time, she began to see him as more. She saw the pain in his eyes, the scars from battles long past. She saw a man who had been shaped by a world of violence, but who had not lost his humanity. He wasn't just a prisoner, a trophy, or a tool to be used in the games of politics. He was a person, with a heart, with thoughts, and with dreams. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of her chambers, Leora asked a question that had been weighing on her mind. "Kale, why do you keep fighting? Why do you keep going, even after everything you've lost?" Kale looked at her for a moment, his expression serious. He had been asked similar questions before, but never by someone who truly cared about the answer. It was always a question that came from commanders or fellow soldiers, a question that was asked out of necessity rather than curiosity. "I fight because I have no choice," Kale said quietly. "There's always someone to fight, always a battle to be won, but I keep going because it's the only thing I know how to do. It's who I am." Leora watched him closely, her brow furrowing. "But what happens when the fighting stops? What happens when the battles are over?" Kale's gaze softened. "I don't know. I haven't thought about it that way." "I suppose that's the hardest part. There's nothing left to fight for when the war is over."
Leora nodded slowly.
She understood more than Kale could know. She had grown up surrounded by people who were constantly striving for power, for more territory, more control. She had been taught that the kingdom's success depended on its strength, on its ability to conquer and expand. But she had come to see that power came at a cost. The wars, the endless battles, the conquests. It was all a cycle, a never-ending struggle for dominance. And in the end, no one truly won. "I think," Leora said after a long pause, "that we're both searching for something. Something beyond the fighting. Something more than what we've been told is important."
Kale looked at her, his eyes meeting hers. "What do you think it is?" Leora smiled softly. "I don't know yet."
"But I think we'll find it together." For the first time in weeks, Kale felt a sense of hope stir within him. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to make him believe that there might be more to life than war, more than just surviving. There was something about Leora, something in the way she spoke, the way she carried herself, that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, there was a place for him in this galaxy that didn't involve fighting. The next few days passed in a blur. Leora and Kale spent more time together, talking about everything and nothing. They visited the palace gardens, walking among the strange alien plants that flourished in the royal grounds. Leora took Kael to the royal library, where they spent hours browsing through ancient texts and books about the history of the Safarian kingdom, of Earth, and of the galaxy itself. Kael was surprised to find that Leora was not only intelligent but genuinely curious about the world beyond her royal duties. She wanted to learn, to understand. But as much as Leora and Kael grew closer, there was a tension in the air, a sense that something was coming. The royal council had not forgotten about Kael, and they were not happy with Leora's decision to claim him as her personal guard. Some saw it as an act of defiance, a challenge to the authority of the crown. Others saw it as a weakness, a sign that the princess was not fit to rule. They whispered behind her back, questioning her judgment and her loyalty to her family. One afternoon, as they were walking in the gardens, Leora could feel the weight of their stares on her back. She knew that the court was watching her, waiting for her to slip up, to make a mistake. She could feel the eyes of the lords and ladies upon her, judging her every move.
"I don't care what they say," Kael said, his voice low. "You don't have to prove anything to them." Leora glanced at him, surprised by his words.
I know. But it's not just about them.
It's about my family, my father, the king. He expects me to follow the rules, to do what's expected of me.
But I don't want to live my life like that. I don't want to be just another princess, playing the part in a game I don't understand. Kael stopped walking and turned to face her. Then, don't.
You don't have to follow their rules, Leora. You have the power to choose your own path. You've already made a choice, and that's more than most people can say.
Leora's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight in her chest lift. Maybe Kael was right. Maybe she didn't have to follow the rules. Maybe it was time to break free. As the days passed, the tension between Leora and the royal council grew. But Leora didn't care. She had made her decision, and she wasn't going to let anyone tell her she was wrong. Kael had shown her that there was more to life than the palace walls, more to the galaxy than power and control. And for the first time in her life, Leora felt like she was truly free. As the weeks went on, the tension in the palace continued to rise. Leora had expected some pushback when she claimed Kael as her personal guard, but she had not anticipated just how much resistance she would face. The royal council, led by the stern and powerful Lord Neraith, was growing increasingly uneasy with her decision. Whispers of discontent spread like wildfire throughout the court. Many of the nobles, especially those who had once held power in the kingdom, saw the princess's actions as a sign of weakness. They thought that a royal daughter should never defy the expectations of her family, especially not in such a public way. Leora could feel their eyes on her every time she entered a room. There were always the subtle comments, the side glances, the whispers behind her back. The nobles who had once smiled and praised her were now cold and distant. They viewed her decision as a threat to their control over the kingdom. After all, the Safarian royal family had always been seen as the ultimate authority. Their power was absolute, and the idea that Leora might be willing to step outside of the tradition made them nervous. The days in the palace grew more tense with each passing week. The quiet rebellion that had begun to stir in Leora's heart was becoming harder to ignore. She was no longer willing to simply accept the status quo, the rigid rules and expectations that had always bound her life. She could no longer live her life in the shadows of the royal court, trapped in a world of formality and duty. She wanted something more. As the days passed, Kael's presence in the palace had become more than just a symbol of rebellion. It was clear to Leora that their bond was something deeper than just the act of claiming him as her guard. Their conversations had become more frequent, their moments together more intimate. Kael, though quiet and reserved, had opened up to her in a way that few had ever done before. She saw the pain he carried with him, the weight of the wars he had fought, the losses he had endured. and the loneliness that came with being a soldier in a galaxy torn apart by endless conflict. One evening, as they walked together through the palace gardens, the moonlight cast long shadows across the path. The air was cool, and the sound of distant waves crashing against the shore could be heard in the distance. Leora had come to enjoy these quiet walks where she could escape the noise and chaos of the palace and just be herself. Kale walked beside her, his eyes scanning the surroundings as usual, his every movement alert, as though he was always on the lookout for danger. "Do you ever feel like you're just trapped?" Leora asked, breaking the silence between them. Kale turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Trapped?" he repeated.
In what sense? Leora paused for a moment, thinking about how best to express what she was feeling. "I've always been told what to do?"
"Always. From the moment I was born, I was groomed to be a princess. I was taught how to walk, how to talk, how to act. Everything was planned for me. There was no room for anything else."
No room for choice. I never had the freedom to make my own decisions, to be my own person.
Kale's gaze softened, though he didn't speak right away. He had learned by now that Leora's words were often carefully chosen, and when she spoke like this, it meant she was wrestling with something deep inside her.
"You're not the only one who's been trapped," he said quietly. "I spent most of my life in the military, fighting wars I didn't choose.
I lost friends, comrades, people I cared about. Every battle, every war, I fought because that's what I was told to do. But when it was over, when there were no more orders to follow, I didn't know who I was anymore. I had spent so long being a soldier, I didn't know how to be anything else." Leora glanced at him, her heart heavy with understanding.
But you're not a soldier anymore, Kale. You don't have to fight anymore.
Kale's lips curled into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe, but old habits die hard. They walked on in silence for a while, the only sound being the rustling of the leaves and the soft crunch of gravel underfoot. Leora could feel the weight of Kale's words, the quiet pain that lingered in his voice. She didn't know what had happened in his past, but she could see the scars it had left on him. He wasn't just a warrior. He was a man who had been shaped by a world of violence and loss. Leora stopped walking and turned to face him. "Kale, I don't want to live like this anymore."
"I don't want to be the princess everyone expects me to be. I want to make my own choices."
"I want to change things." Kale met her gaze, his expression serious. "Changing things isn't easy."
"The kingdom is built on centuries of tradition."
"It's not something you can just tear down with one decision." "I know," Leora said softly, "but if I don't try, then I'll always be stuck in this life, always living in the shadow of my father, always living according to the court's rules."
"I don't want that." Kale nodded, his expression softening.
"I understand, but be careful, Leora. You can't just break tradition without consequences. There are people who will fight you, people who will try to stop you."
"I know," she said again, her voice steady. "But I'm willing to face whatever comes."
"I'm tired of being trapped in this role. It's time to break free." Kale studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod.
Then I'll stand by you. You don't have to do it alone.
Leora's heart swelled at his words. She had never felt so understood, so supported. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had someone by her side who truly cared about her, someone who would help her fight for what she believed in. The next few days were filled with quiet planning. Leora began to take small steps to assert her independence, making decisions for herself rather than following the rules set out for her. She began to meet with people in the palace who shared her vision, people who were tired of the same old cycle of power and control. She knew it wouldn't be easy, and she knew that there were many who would try to stop her, but she was determined. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was in control of her destiny. But as Leora began to challenge the royal court, the opposition grew stronger. Lord Nareth, the head of the council, had always been a staunch supporter of tradition. He saw Leora's actions as a direct threat to the established order, and he was not one to back down easily. He began to gather his allies, preparing for a confrontation with the princess. Leora could feel the storm brewing. The palace, once a place of safety and security, now felt like a battleground. She had made her choice, and she knew that the consequences of that choice would be far-reaching. But she also knew that she couldn't go back. She had to move forward, no matter what. One evening, as the tension in the palace reached its peak, Leora received word that her father, King Kalin, had called for a private meeting. She knew that this would be the moment of truth. The king had always been a man of authority, a man who expected obedience from those around him. Would he stand by her, or would he force her back into the role she had spent so long trying to escape? As she made her way to his chambers, Leora couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. This was the moment she had feared, the moment when she would have to face the full weight of her decision. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew that whatever happened, she had to stay true to herself, no matter the cost. The atmosphere in the palace had shifted. What was once a place of quiet order and ceremony now felt like the edge of a storm. The tension between Leora and the royal court was undeniable. Every decision she made, every step she took, seemed to fuel the fire of opposition. And now, with the king's private summons, Leora knew that she was standing on the brink of something much larger than she could have imagined. The time for secrets was over. She would have to face her father, the man who had shaped her life, and tell him everything. Her heart raced as she walked down the grand hallway toward the king's chambers. Her steps echoed through the cold marble floors, each sound like a reminder of what was at stake. She had never questioned her father's authority before. As a child, she had always done what was expected of her, and in return she had been showered with praise and affection. But that had all changed. Now she was a woman who was no longer content to live in the shadows of tradition and expectation. She had made a choice, and there was no turning back. As she reached the large, ornate doors of the king's chambers, she hesitated. She knew that this conversation could change everything. She had no idea how her father would react. Would he support her, or would he condemn her for defying the royal family's way of life? She took a deep breath and knocked softly. The door opened, and she stepped inside. The king sat at his desk, a large map of the Sifarian Empire spread before him. He looked up as she entered, his face serious, but there was a flicker of something, perhaps curiosity, behind his eyes. Leora had never seen him this way before. She had always known him as a man of strength and certainty, a ruler who always had the answers. But now, for the first time, she could see a hint of uncertainty in him. "Leora," King Kalin said, his voice steady but with an edge she hadn't expected.
"I've called you here because there are matters we need to discuss. Matters that concern not only you, but the future of our kingdom."
Leora nodded, trying to keep her composure. "I understand, father. What do you wish to discuss?" The king motioned to a chair across from him, and Leora sat down, her hands resting in her lap. He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing his next words carefully. "I've heard the rumors, Leora," he said slowly.
"The rumors about you and that human warrior, about your decision to claim him as your personal guard."
"You've been defying the royal court, challenging the traditions that have been upheld for generations. And now, I must ask you, why?"
Leora's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let her nerves show.
This was it. This was the moment when she had to make her stand. "Because I believe it's time for change," she said, her voice firm.
I believe that the kingdom and I have been living in a world where tradition and power have become more important than the lives of the people. I believe that we've been trapped by our own pride, trapped by the idea that we must always maintain control.
But there's more to life than that, Father. There's more to the galaxy than just power.
The king's expression darkened.
You're speaking of rebellion, of changing the very foundation of our empire. You're speaking of throwing away everything that has made us strong. Leora shook her head, her eyes filled with determination.
I'm not throwing anything away, Father. I'm just saying that we can build something better.
We can still be strong, but we don't have to rule with fear and control. We don't have to crush those who are different from us, or force people into roles they don't want to play.
We can choose a different path. For a long moment, there was silence between them.
The king looked at her with a mixture of pride and disappointment. He had always hoped that his daughter would one day take up the mantle of leadership, but he had never expected her to challenge the very system that had supported their family for centuries.
Do you understand what you're saying? King Kalen asked, his voice now laced with frustration. You're speaking of breaking down everything that has made our empire great. You're speaking of abandoning the traditions that have kept us strong in the face of war and conquest. You think the people want change, but they don't.
They want security. They want stability.
I don't think the people want stability at any cost, Leora replied, her voice steady. I think they want a chance at something more.
They want to know that their voices matter, that their lives matter.
I've seen it, Father.
I've seen the way people suffer, the way they're treated like pawns in a game of power. I've seen it in the way the royal court has treated KL, and I won't stand for it anymore. At the mention of Kale's name, King Kalen's face twisted in anger. That human warrior, he spat, is nothing but a symbol of your defiance. You have no idea what you're doing, Leora. You've allowed your emotions to cloud your judgment.
This isn't just about him. This is about everything we've worked for.
I don't think you understand, Father, Leora said, her voice now rising. This isn't just about me or about KL.
This is about all of us. It's about the future of this kingdom, the future of the people we rule.
I want to make a difference. I want to leave something behind that matters.
And I won't do that by playing the same old games, by following the same old rules.
The king stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor.
You've always been stubborn, Leora, he said, his voice now cold. But this is different.
You're not just defying me, you're defying the very essence of our kingdom. And I won't allow it.
If you continue down this path, you'll be a traitor to everything we stand for. Leora's heart sank, but she held her ground.
I'm not a traitor, Father.
I'm trying to create something new, something better. The king's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Leora saw something in his gaze that she had never seen before. Anger, fear, and a deep sense of betrayal. Then you leave me no choice, he said quietly. You've made your decision, and I've made mine. With that, he turned away, his back to her. Leora felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had never imagined that it would come to this, that she would have to choose between her family and the future she believed in. But as she stood there, watching her father's back, she knew that there was no going back. The kingdom was changing, and she was a part of that change, no matter the cost. She turned to leave, her footsteps heavy, as she made her way toward the door. But before she left, she turned back one last time. Father, she said softly, her voice breaking, I'm sorry. The king did not respond. He simply stood there, staring out the window, as the weight of the decision settled over both of them.